Hey everybody, it is Mr. George, and I wanted to put together a quick video for you on China. We'll look at ancient China, and then what we'll do is we'll show the transition towards classical China. So when we start looking at China, we're talking about dynasties. We're talking about ruling families here. So the Xia dynasty, around 2000 BCE, is where we start to see the emergence of a Chinese dynasty. Not a lot of evidence. And then as we move on to the Shang Dynasty, which almost 700 years, brings us from 1700 to 1027. And you can see the diagram on the right that kind of shows the boundaries of the Shang Dynasty over in China. Now, when we talk about the Shang Dynasty, we really think about oracle bones and the use of tortoise shells as record keeping, ways of keeping track of something. So this gives us our first glimpse at evidence here within the Shang Dynasty. And we also have some other characteristics here as far as how they're able to use technology here as far as evolving. Just to kind of compare the River Valley civilizations during this time period, this Bronze Age empires. So we've got China, we've got India, we've got Mesopotamia, and we have Egypt. We have Egypt. So this brings us to the Zhou dynasty. That is the Zhou dynasty, which brings us from 1027 down to 256. So this dynasty does kind of bring us into the classical period of Eastern civilization. When we talk about classical Eastern civilizations, we're referring to China and India at this point. So one term that you're going to see is the mandate of heaven. So when we have dynasties, we need a way of looking at a dynasty and determining, how can we justify the overthrow of one dynasty for another one? So I guess if we had to say what's a comparison of the mandate of heaven to today, I would say voting and elections. So when we talk about mandate of heaven, think of it as this system of replacing an old dynasty with a new dynasty. When we talk about record keeping, typically the winners end up writing history, and of course this comes up in the second dynasty because it wouldn't make any sense to have this mandate of heaven to get rid of the first dynasty. So this is why we start to see this concept of this mandate of heaven that will last thousands of years. So as far as another connection with this is referred to as the dynastic cycle. So where you see the this circular motion here, where we see mandate of heaven. So we have strong dynasty establishes peace and prosperity. It's considered to have this mandate of heaven, this justification. And then in time, what happens is that we start to see corruption. We start to see increase in taxes. We start to see the power is being weakened. And then there might be some type of natural disaster, famine, something, outside invasions, something that kind of looks like a sign to people that maybe it's losing its mandate. And then we have obviously another dynasty that's more than willing to kind of like step in and try and show that they indeed should be the new dynasty. And then we have this overthrow of old to new, and then it kind of restores some type of order, because obviously we were losing some type of social order before that, and then the cycle begins again. So when we talk about the Qin dynasty, that was only very, very brief, 20 years or so. And then you look at Tang and Song dynasty, you're talking 300 years. Zhou dynasty, you're talking 700-800 years. So the duration of these dynasties is very diverse. So during the Zhou Dynasty, we start to see some ways of like developing and living, and we start to establish, you know, these cultural significance as far as silk production, that later on will become very high demand product. So we have this concept of feudalism, which we will see again in European Middle Ages, where it's a system based on, it's a political system based on land, where land is given to other people, as ways of kind of keeping loyalty, in exchange, for these relationships. So people are getting different things out of these arrangements, whether it's loyalty, whether it's military, whether it's food, protection. So this is what's happening in feudal China during the Zhou Dynasty. Now, during this system, you're going to see some of these nobles starting to like rise up, and people again are looking for more power, and that kind of leads to this Warring States period, where we have these different individuals, these powerful feudal lords who are now fighting over power and land, and we have disunity. And what's happening is this is where we see the development of these new Chinese philosophies or ethical belief system, which I mentioned in a prior video on ethical belief systems, where we see Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. And a lot of this, each one of those kind of looks at, why is there so much suffering in the world, and how can we create some type of order from a situation where there's a lot of disorder. Okay? And then from the Qin Dynasty, which was a time period where we have Shi Huangdi becomes the first emperor of China, with harsh punishments, strong autocratic rule. Dynasty only lasts 20 years just because of the intolerance, and because people become so dissatisfied with government. And then we see this replacement under the Han Dynasty, where we start to see the incorporation of Confucian values, civil service exams, education, and the Han Dynasty overlays the Roman dynasty. Those two dynasties, or two empires, are often compared because they're very large, coexisting around the same time, coming up with similar solutions as far as conquering, construction of roads, common currency, and that kind of brings us, through the classical period in China. As far as just comparing these dynasties here, you can see on this map that the dynasties are getting bigger, boundaries are getting bigger. And during the Qin Dynasty, we do see the construction of the Great Wall of China. Purpose of a wall is to keep people out. It's also to keep people in. And as far as, looking at the next step, this really is going to start to lead to, these trade networks. Is kind of like these classical periods. This classical period is really showing the rise of certain empires. And what's going to happen is we're going to start to see communication, transportation, trade. We're going to see some more interaction between these different civilizations, and that's where we see the Silk Road. That's where we see the Silk Road. That's what we see with this transportation network, and that's how we have products from China, such as silk, ending up in Rome, because the products are actually being distributed. So here's another great image of the Silk Road that also looks at not just the land road, the land routes from the Silk Road, but also we're now starting to see some sea routes that are connecting, China and India with East Africa. And what's going to happen is, as we start to see Islam spread, we're now going to start to see trade really starting to ramp up between the East and the West. as well as the Arabian Peninsula, that really becomes the crossroads between the three continents. So I hope you enjoyed that video today that looked at kind of the evolution of China, as well as terms that kind of get associated with, ancient China and classical China. Thanks for watching.